Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I'm your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today as we are approaching the end of 2021. Soon to be into the new year of 2022, the midterm elections, and, well, who knows what else. But one of the things we do know that's going to be happening is something that's going to affect all of us. In my ability to present you videos, in your ability to chat with your friends, neighbors, coworkers, and everyone else. That's the internet, social media. There is a strong movement that is happening right now, both from the left and the right, to address this, but we see a very different direction from each of those groups. And going into 2022, we're seeing states that are taking more active positions to emphasize that difference. But before we get started, we do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being here with us. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we go live. We reach out to speak to you on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, DLive, essentially all social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear your voice about the issues that matter, the issues that affect you. And we do that because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to free speech, even if your government does not agree, even if the internet overlords don't agree. We believe you have a right to speak that is unalienable and should be heard. So we hope that you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we do our live stream. We hope to see you this Sunday as well. With that said, let's talk about 2022. Across the nation, many states are preparing themselves at this moment to be able to get their legislative agendas in place. They're preparing themselves to be able to cover all the issues for the next legislative year. And so we're seeing bills that are being introduced now in December that are going to be voted on sometime after January. These will affect our lives. One of the bills is coming out of New York State, and this will affect the internet, whether you use Facebook, Twitter, DLive, doesn't matter, YouTube, any internet social media source will be affected by this. And we want to talk about how this is going to change your life, because if we're correct, New York State is looking to control your voice, not the social media company your voice is on. Now, this goes back, and the difference I think is important to understand. We have to go back to 2019. We could go even further back in time, but I think 2019 is enough for us to understand the difference of the two things that are going on in our nation at this time and how it's going to affect you. So, in 2019, there was the Senate Bill 1914, Ending Support for Internet Censorship Act. This is an example of what we see coming from the right. The right is looking to protect the First Amendment. They're looking to allow people to have content that is political in nature and not be punished for that they wouldn't be ostracized just because they have a political view that certain internet companies like Twitter and Facebook and Google do not like with Twitter's newest CEO stating that the First Amendment does not apply to Twitter, that this is not one of the things that they will protect or even consider in their business. It's a troubling statement. And this idea to protect individuals, and to quote from the bill prohibits a large social media company from moderating information on its platform from a politically biased standpoint. It is protecting your ability to speak. May 20th of 2021, we see the other point of view. This is coming from the left-leaning Democrats. And what we hear is they're looking to control access. And that's the big difference between the two issues. We have the Republicans that are looking to control and allow content and your freedom of choice and your freedom of voice. We see from the Democrats, they want to control your access as well as what you can say. Certain things are permissible, certain things are not, and you may not have access if they do not like it. They want control. And this is in H.R. 3451, introduced by Representative Trahan out of Massachusetts. Her bill, which is H.R. 34, is to require covered platforms to provide information about their advertising to academic researchers and for other purposes. They want to control the content that is reaching you. Now, that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. But ultimately, what it is control of content and control of access to that content. They want to make sure what is going out to the public and who can receive it. They're controlling access and therefore controlling your voice. It is a violation of the First Amendment, in our opinion, on this channel. We're not lawyers, but that's how we understand it. And to further emphasize what we're talking about, we want to look at what was said recently by Senator Richard Blumenthal on December 8th, about the same time that he was speaking to the Communist Party in the Communist Party of the United States. At the same time, he was making the statement that social media cannot self-police and that the government needs to grow in its power to be able to regulate social media, that they need control over the access and the content, which would violate the First Amendment. Now, I pointed out something in here, and I want to be very clear about it. This is Senator Blumenthal, as he says, but self-policing depends on trust. The trust is gone. Okay. What we need now is independent researchers, objective overseers, not chosen by big tech, but from outside, and strong, vigorous enforcement of standards that stop the destructive, toxic content that now, too often, is driven at kids and takes them down rabbit holes to dark places. What exactly is the destructive, toxic content? What is defined by that? Is that political in nature? Does that include things like saying, let's go Brandon, which is opposed by the Democratic Party, that they consider that to be a slur? Is that something that cannot be said now? Is that something that would restrict content? And what about protecting people for their right to say things like that, to make political commentary like this channel and others that are right-leaning, that aren't agreeing with, say, BLM or Antifa? Are we allowed to still make our content? Is that considered destructive or toxic? Who is this outside group? These are big questions, very important questions. But Senator Blumenthal wants to control that. He wants government to grow and to have the control of the switch on what gets through and what has access. He goes further. At another portion here, he states he's also pointed to the child protection systems in place in the United Kingdom and suggests some of the strategies could be incorporated into protections for children in the United States. And we're all for protecting children. But we want you to understand the logic and the mindset that's going on here. The United Kingdom does not have free speech. The First Amendment does not exist in the United Kingdom. You cannot speak. And there are many restrictions on what can and cannot be said, what is considered offensive, and what will get you punished in the United Kingdom that do not apply and do not exist in the United States. So to incorporate a hyper-restrictive set of laws from the United Kingdom and to bring that into the United States, which is a free system, is by its definition going to destroy the First Amendment. Now, I understand we must protect children, and I agree. That's one of the actual purposes of the government, to protect the public. That's their job. That's why government exists. and to definitely protect those who are most vulnerable in our communities, like children. So that in and of itself is not a bad thing. But we have to understand, when we're incorporating ideas from systems that do not have the same level of freedom as we do, systems that are built upon a concept where the government has more power than the individual and the public is punished for trying to exercise their unalienable right to be able to speak, to criticize both other businesses, to criticize other people, and to criticize their government. If you have restrictions of that nature and you're bringing in a platform, a law built on that lack of ability, well, that can be very troubling. Because as we have seen in law after law after law, the government never stops just at that point. If it's applied to children, it will be applied to everyone else. It's just a matter of when that happens. Now you may think, Mike, but you're really not making that clear. How are we seeing the difference? Well, again, I've shown you bills where the Democrats over time have consistently been saying and have had comments where they are saying they want to control the access of the public to information. That their concern is what they call misinformation or disinformation, which in fact may be the truth. It may be something they don't like, or they don't like how it has been said. Whether it's considered a microaggression, whether it's considered racist tomorrow, even though it wasn't racist yesterday, it doesn't matter. They want access and control. And the difference, again, is here are some of the bills that come from the right. This is what we're seeing from right-leaning sources. We see that in each and every state that's here, Florida, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, Iowa, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, West Virginia, Idaho, North Carolina, Utah, Wyoming, New England, Nebraska, Missouri, Louisiana, Kentucky. In each of these bills, you'll see something that's very, very consistent and the same. The bill will allow users to sue social media companies that censor them. The bill would allow users to sue after being censored for political or religious content. The bill would introduce fines to social media companies that censor users. This is about protection of the people. It is emphasizing if your content is about religion, or if it is an expression of religion, or it is an expression of a political ideology, whether that be Republican, conservative, libertarian, or even if it's Democratic, a moderate Democrat, and it is in opposition of, say, the progressive left, which is most supported by social media, that is illegal and needs to be punished. What we see is like what we see and was reported on December 26th. There's a new bill to hold social media companies accountable for disinformation. Now, this should trouble people. What is disinformation? That is actually highly subjective. It's information that someone does not agree with. Kind of like when the New York Post in October of 2020 said they had actual evidence on a laptop of the collusion between Hunter Biden and China, which brought up questions about the Biden campaign and Joe Biden himself with China. So the question is, was that fair to be labeled as disinformation and then was excluded by Twitter, by Facebook, by Google, that they subjected this, they restricted access to this information because it was politically disadvantageous. And it was labeled as disinformation, and even in some cases, misinformation. 4 months after the election, every one of the major news media sources and Twitter and the social media, Facebook, Google, turned around and admitted that the laptop was real, that the information contained on it did exist, and therefore a question of the influence of China on Joe Biden via Hunter Biden is realistic and is being investigated, in fact, by the United States government, the Department of Justice, as slowly as that is going forward. So, was it disinformation? Because according to many Democrats, many progressives, it was, and yet it was true. So disinformation isn't necessarily untrue information. It may be disadvantageous information at any given time. That's why you should be troubled by New York state legislators who are trying to restrict disinformation. In fact, this is from New York State Senator Brad, I believe it's Hoylman, who's out of Manhattan, the center of New York City, center of progressive ideology. And he comes together and he's saying, and I will quote, "We need real-world solutions to the growing problems of online disinformation and hate speech. Throwing your hands up and saying nothing can be done is insufficient. People's lives are endangered every day, and nobody's being held accountable. The amount of online disinformation and hate speech being promoted by social media platforms for profit is abhorrent." Let's think about that statement for a second. He's talking about disinformation, which, as we have just shown, and there are many cases of this, where we have seen the news media say, this isn't true, this isn't real, and then we get something else. Great example of disinformation that is universal. Joe Biden on September 1st told the American people that there were only 85 Americans left in Afghanistan. We found out October 27th that the true number were at least 479, and it could be as high as 2,000 Americans were abandoned in Afghanistan due to the retreat issued by the Biden administration. He lied directly to the American people. He provided disinformation. He said there was 85 to 100 people. There were 479 to 2,000. That's a lie. That's disinformation. That is credibly disinformation. Was Joe Biden held accountable for that? No. Has the news media talked about that? No. They've avoided that. They've eliminated that. And information that comes out about that has been subject to restrictions both by algorithms and direct censorship from social media on overlords. So he's worried about online disinformation of a certain type and hate speech. Well, what is the definition of hate speech? Truly, we truly want to ask you, what is hate speech? Because people say that a lot. They mention that word a lot, hate speech. What is hate speech? What exactly comprises hate speech? I mean, when you look at it from New York State, when you look up hate speech, you're trying to get a definition and they bring up hate crimes. A hate crime consists of when someone has intentionally committed the act or acts constituting the offense in a substantial part because of a belief or perception regarding the race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or sexual orientation of a person, regardless of whether the belief or perception is correct. To put that into a way that makes sense for a human being. As an example, when we had a Back the Blue event in Binghamton, New York, that I sponsored and I was speaking at, and when BLM came to that event uninvited to protest, and they silenced or attempted to silence the speakers at that event, well, it was because the event saying that police in the Binghamton region, in the Broome County region, had done a good job, that there is no police brutality that has been recorded for years in this community, and that's something that should be lauded. Well, that was hate speech, because we were talking about racism at that point, according to BLM, according to Antifa and the progressive leaders of tomorrow. And that's a crime. microaggressions are a crime. The fact that someone could perceive that is criminal. When we critiqued just a month ago a program at SUNY Broome College in Binghamton, Broome County, when we critiqued that event, which we believe increased the teachings of racism under the critical race theory applications, well, then that was considered racist. That was a microaggression. And according to the definition of hate crimes, as being applied and being interpreted by individuals like the Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, BLM, Antifa, and New York State Senator Hoylman, that's a crime. And that should be punished. And we should be denied the access to let you know that information so that you can make up your mind for yourself, to be able to see both sides of an event. What is the mindset that's coming out of State Senator Hoylman? What does he actually believe? Where's his point of view? Because that matters. Well, he's actually very much a progressive. And it's not just because I don't agree with his politics. We know that he's a member of the Working Families Party, which is a more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So he has that ideology with him. And in fact, he supported things like the Police Statistics and Accountability Act in 2020, that he was part of the movement, and the Working Families Party was part of the movement to seek to defund police in New York State, something that resulted in 600 officers being taken, losing their jobs, being removed, and an increase in 2020 and in 2021 of over 25% increase in murders and violent crime in New York State and in New York City. And he has several bills that he's gone over that are questionable, kind of like prohibits the sale. He wants to prohibit the sale of sodium nitrate and sodium nitrite to any person under the age of 21. That's salt. He wants to stop people under the age of 21 from getting a salt preservative. Not really clear why. Because it's public health? Why is it public health? What's the problem with people being able to have salt? Literally, it's salt. Okay. But he has other bills, like limiting the authority of cities, villages, and towns to impose certain zoning requirements. So he doesn't want your local community to be able to have its own laws that affect the local community. This is S7574. This is important. This is your local community. And mind you, if this is happening in New York State, it's happening in California. It's happening in Illinois. It's happening in the Democratic, in Michigan. It's happening in all of the Democratic major controlled cities and states across this nation. And that means it may come to you. Our progressive senator here wants to be able to control what your local government does so that state government is the one who has to control, that there is someone above them, that elites are going to decide what's going to happen in your community, not you. And I want to make sure that you understand, we're not kidding when we say he's a progressive and that he has a progressive outlook, because this is his tweet from June 7th of 2020. It's in our power to end the curfew. It's in our power to repeal 50-A. It's in our power to end mass incarceration. It's in our power to dismantle white supremacy. BLM. Well, that's a very progressive point of view. And ending mass incarceration, the bail reform bill actually introduced individuals, as admitted by the disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo, that 14% of those who were released because of bail reform came out and did 2.5 more crimes once they were released because of the bail reform. That's a fact. We've covered it on this program before. And now he wants to dismantle white supremacy. I'm sure he wants to apologize for being born white. He agrees, it appears by that statement, that he believes in the critical race theory ideology that white people are inherently racist and black people are inherently victims, something we disagree with and oppose. But overall, this is, and these are statements coming from the furthest fringes of the Democratic Party in New York State and this nation. So we have to understand who's making these statements. And we have to understand what is it he's actually looking to do. Because we want to look at New York State Senate Bill 7544. Provides a tax credit for the cost of subscriptions that support local newspapers and other local media, and payroll tax credit for compensation of journalists to provide further repeal such provisions. So, Senator Hoylman has made a decision that New York State should take your tax dollars and provide them to certain types of businesses. Those businesses being predominantly newspapers and certain journalists. There's a problem here. This is the government picking and choosing not just what business will win, but picking which business is going to survive. They're going to get a discount on their ability to exist in the marketplace and compete with other businesses. That doesn't sound like there couldn't possibly be any bias involved with that. Could you imagine any newspaper that received this tax credit money from you as taxpayers without your permission, that they're going to get this benefit? And do you think they're going to like Senator Hoylman a little bit more, that they might have better coverage for him in some of his ideas? Do you think they might support him a bit more when he looks for re-election? Is this a bias to him and his party if this were to go through? Because the government is getting involved directly with the application of the press, someone who is supposed to be there to critique the government. And this does not apply to online journalists. Legitimate online journalists, there are many of them. Many people have gone from doing publications at newspapers and have created their own independent organizations like the Atlantic, the Intercept, and even individuals within those organizations like Glenn Greenwald have gone on to a subscriber-only basis online, but continue to be able to provide the same journalistic quality that they have always provided before. But they may not apply to this, because this only applies to specific types of companies, only companies that qualify under certain requirements, that they have insurances and they have certain sizes and they've existed for a certain amount of time. Does that mean that companies that don't qualify that are not journalists? Well, that's not true. There are many people in the industry that are online, that are respected, that are recognized, and they don't qualify under this very specific structure created by Senator Hoylman to promote certain types of businesses that promote information. And this, in fact, controls censorship. Well, controls your access to information. It's a control. It's power. It's buying goodwill from the very people who are there to critique these elected officials. So we understand now, I think, the mindset of Senator Brad Hoylman. He is a progressive. He believes in control from the top down of government, even over local government. He believes in progressive ideology, even when that ideology inflicts more harm than good to the public. And he is more than willing to be able to manipulate businesses, to have the government pick winners and choose losers, and to steer, to bend the will of certain news media businesses into his favor by giving them money, your taxpayer money. Now, Senator Hoylman may disagree with me, He may want to say that he doesn't believe that my interpretation is correct. I'm only going by the bills he has put forward and the statements he has made. I don't know him personally. But that's what his policies are saying. Whether or not he wants to say that directly, that's what his policies are saying. And it's these policies that he is providing that is leading to yet another bigger problem, and that's in the form of what we'll see here. Bill S. 7568, New York State Senate Bill 7568, prohibits the knowing and reckless promotion of unlawful or false material and providing remedies for violations of such prohibition. Now that may sound wonderful. This is going to be happening in 2022. This is the government just ahead of the 2022 midterm elections that will involve members at the local, state, and federal level that are all seeking to be reelected, including in the state legislature. This is at the same time that he's going to be running for reelection, presumably. And so how does this law affect that? How does it affect the control that we've seen that he's looking to have? Because at the same time that this law is going to be, he's going to attempt to pass this law, he's also attempting to pass a law that will push the news media into his favor, to owe him one, to owe him some good coverage. And at the same time, for those online who do not qualify as news media, and maybe just the conversations of the public like you and I, speaking about this, having comments about this, as is our First Amendment right, something that Senator Richard Blumenthal does not want us to have. He wants to emulate countries that do not have a First Amendment right. Well, we're seeing this from State Senator Hoylman. And I want to look into what does this bill actually do? What does it actually say? An act to amend the General Obligations Law in relation to prohibiting the knowing and reckless promotion of unlawful or false material and providing remedies for violation. So now we've added a new thing. So it's not just that someone has put out something that is unlawful, that they have put out something that is criminal. No, now we're adding in false material, things that are untrue. Well, that's interesting because how you define that is very important. I believe it even goes on. This law, which will create a new cause of action for public nuisance against any person that unlawfully or unreasonably, knowingly or recklessly creates or contributes to a condition that endangers public health or safety through the promotion of a content the person knew or reasonably should know is harmful, false, or unlawful. That is a very important statement because this is what this bill is about. If you say something that someone considers is harmful, is a microaggression, that they don't agree with the conclusion of what you have said, and they say that it's not true today, even though it may be proven true tomorrow, well, then that is illegal, according to Senator Hoylman. And I want you to put this into context and understand using the New York Post. Just as a simple example, the New York Post, the fact that they provided evidence, a credible news agency provided evidence to the world of an international influence in our elections. Hunter Biden having conversations with and receiving money from the Chinese government as his father is running for the presidency of the United States. And that was considered at the time to be untrue, that it was false. That was the answer that we received from the social media. They labeled it false. And yet, even though they labeled it false, 4 months later, to far less fanfare, the entire news media, the left-leaning news media, turned around and said, it is actually true. Every word was true. The Post was vindicated. Everything they said was a fact. So, are we seeing that Senator Hoylman is actually looking to protect the public, or is he trying to protect political ideology? Is he trying to give more control to elected officials, including himself, for their benefit, or is he trying to actually do something to help the public? We have to look through the bill. It says, advocates for the use of, if you advocate for the use of force, is directed to or to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. So this is how you are guilty of violating this law if it is likely that it could produce someone using force. How do you prove that? Includes a false statement of fact or fraudulent medical theory that is likely to endanger the public safety or health. Well, let's think about that for a second. Includes a false statement of fact. Again, we can go through, and we've seen this throughout 2021, where news media is suddenly telling us months afterwards that the thing they told us before is not true, that wasn't true then, is true now. We've seen this over and over again. Or fraudulent medical theory. What about CNN lying about Joe Rogan and the medications that he was provided by a licensed doctor for when he became ill? And for him to say that he was prescribed these medications lawfully in the United States from his doctor in good standing, and he tells the public that that's what he did, is that fraudulent? Because the news media took it as if it were. We covered 4 separate protests of the vaccine mandates. The mandates. And we had individuals, doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who spoke with us on video as well as separate of that, speaking about the problems of having a broad, universal policy from top-down government that does not take into account the individual needs of people in this state. Is that fraudulent medical theory to report what they are going through, and the fact that it is to have these mandates is not good because it's one stop, one idea for everyone, but yet everyone is an individual and has different personal needs? He goes on to say, the private right of action, any person, firm, corporation, or association that has been damaged as a result of a person's acts or omissions in violation of this article shall be entitled to bring an action for recovery of damages or to enforce this article in the Supreme Court. You can be sued. Notice he's talking about individuals. He's talking about people. Now, the New York State bill, again, was about holding social media companies. But in reading the bill, they're talking about individuals. Now, they do also include corporations. But the thing that's troubling about this is they're saying that you can be held liable for having an opinion. You can be held liable if your thoughts are promoted or put out on social media, especially if someone likes them, if people follow them, if people say, I want to read what you had to say. Not that they necessarily agree with it, because Senator Hoylman doesn't like that, because he didn't agree with it, because he personally might find it to be a microaggression. He might find it to be politically inconvenient. He might not agree with the conclusion, and because of that, well, you should be punished, and so should the social media source. So again, this brings us back to the same thing I was saying before. The Democratic Party, and especially the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, are looking for control and they're looking for power. They're looking for censorship of you and the social media. They want to control the content and your access to that content. They're not protecting you. They're trying to isolate you. They're trying to ostracize you if you do not agree, if you do anything that is not approved. And I believe this legislation that comes from Senator Hoylman is exactly that. Because he cannot show us what is unlawful or false or a hate crime, as he wants to say. As he said here, that he wants to protect the public from hate speech and disinformation, which he cannot define, that New York State itself cannot define and does not define. Perhaps you're someone who says you want to quote that South Africa has determined that certain pandemic variants are not as dangerous as other pandemic variants, and that people shouldn't be terrified that they're going to die because that's not what the data is showing. Does that mean you've committed crime? Have you wielded a deadly implement by expressing your opinion based on the facts that exist? Because according to Senator Hoylman, it appears, yes, you have. And you should be sued and you should be punished. And the social media should be punished for allowing you to have said that. When we take this into context and we try to understand what is it that's actually being said here, because this isn't about protection. This isn't to protect you. We have the ability to take care of that. If you see something that you think is incorrect, if you see flat earth commentary, just as an example, and someone says the earth is flat and you don't agree and you don't believe the evidence is there, and you believe they're providing you disinformation or misinformation, saying the earth is flat, should they go to jail? Or if you really don't know, you read a textbook, you read a science book, you ask a question and say, prove it. Show me your evidence. Isn't that the answer to disinformation and misinformation? Isn't that right? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? In New York State, we are having a problem with our health care. In other words, it's harder for people to go, and we're seeing hospitals shrink down they shrank down their beds that were available. They've cut the number of procedures that can happen because in September, appointed Governor Kathy Hochul fired 34,000 doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers in New York State. That is a fact. It's indisputable. It's not a question. Now, she fired those healthcare workers, which caused a crisis in New York before any other factor happened. Hospitals, immediately after having to fire these individuals, then had to reduce the number of patients that they could see and the services that they could provide. Then we had the latest variant of the pandemic, which increased the number of people who were seeking hospitalizations, though not nearly as high as prior variants had done. They're now hearing appointed Governor Kathy Hochul saying, well, it's because of the pandemic. That's a lie. Under the ruling of this new idea, this legislation coming from State Senator Hoyle, and again, that's Bill S-7568, well then, that's disinformation. That's endangering the safety of others, theoretically, and that's something I could be sued for. Under his point of view, it may be politically inconvenient, but that's not the same thing. We have this bill which is going to attack you. It's going to say that it's going to attack the social media companies, but it's really censoring your access to be able to speak and to see what people have said. And at the same time, he is also trying to promote another bill, 7544, that incentivizes the news media to back him up and to protect him from any concern and criticism. Who do you think he's really trying to protect? Do you really think that's in your best interest? There's a lot of ways to look at the issues with social media, and there are some. There are some dangers that exist with it, without doubt. But shouldn't we protect people's right to speak and the people's right to turn away from something that is being spoken, as opposed to creating more control of the government over what we get to say and what we get to hear, and to punish people who have a different opinion while the government is buying off those who are meant to critique it? You may disagree. You may have a different point of view. You may think these are wonderful bills that will be beyond reproach and will be used in only the best way possible. We don't see that, but we would like to hear what you see, and we look forward to hearing your comment. And we hope that you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our live stream, where we will discuss this and other issues to hear what you have to say and to hear what you think about it, because we believe your voice matters. So we look forward to seeing you this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we hope you will be well.